Okay, very good. All right. Well, hi, Emily and Claire. It's nice to be with you both this morning. Thank you so much for joining and for talking with me a little bit this morning.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Yes, happy to be here.
Okay, well, very good. So I'm going to just start by asking Emily and then Claire to just kind of briefly introduce yourselves and a little bit about your background.
Yeah, well, my name is Emily. I just recently graduated with a double bachelor's in music education and violin performance. So music is pretty much my life. And then on the side, I'm also a figure skater and a figure skating coach. And some other fun facts about me, I love reading. I have a podcast with Claire, who you'll meet in a second, where we talk about different issues in music. So that's a huge passion of mine and doing advocacy work like this.
And
Wonderful.
I'm Claire, and I am the other half of our Dissonant Dialogues podcast team. I am an opera singer. I graduated in 2020 with a bachelor degree in classical vocal performance. I'm 28, and yeah, I love getting to do advocacy work with Emily and sort of promoting safety in the classical community. I also have a huge interest in promoting sort of justice and unpacking trauma that comes with purity culture from my background in my childhood and religious trauma. And I make dollhouses. That's my other little fun fact from scratch. Yeah.
Very good. Amazing backgrounds, each of you. And I love the sort of the creative arts. It's awesome. You both
You
are
got to have hobbies.
absolutely, absolutely. It's so true. Okay, so I just want to sort of ask each of you a little bit about why you have made the choice to speak up about the abuse that you've experienced, and a little bit about that. Obviously, with what we're doing, we're not giving any names or revealing details about either one of your stories just to protect anonymity, and confidentiality, but just sort of a brief overview of sort of what your experience has been with abuse and why you made the decision to speak up about it.
Yeah, so for me, this kind of goes back to give a little bit of context. So I started playing the violin when I was 12 years old, and almost immediately I knew that was going to be my career. I had actually been a figure skater for quite a few years before and into my music playing, but I quit skating just to solely focus on my music career because I knew that was what I wanted. I spent all of my teenage years practicing. Like, I was not a person to go to parties, do any of that so-called like fun stuff. Like, I was 100% of my time was going to opportunities with music just to make it to conservatory. Like, that was the only thing on the top of my mind. I wasn't thinking even a lot about post conservatory. I was like, I just want to make it there. Then there was the shutdown from the pandemic for my first year of school, but I did do it online. And the following year, it was finally in person. And this is kind of where my story, I want to say progresses, not necessarily where it begins, because that is where I met my abuser was online. Um, Basically, to sum it up in one sentence of what occurred basically over the course of 2 years, maybe more-ish, is that I was both groomed and then later on sexually assaulted several times by a male music professor in his office at a conservatory. Um, the grooming process kind of took place at the beginning, and then later on this occurred, I would say, I guess, between like 2.5 years. So where I got my um, power, I guess, to be able to speak up started by telling like one person at a time. So I was in therapy while the abuse was happening, and I finally told my therapist the truth of everything that was going on because he had conditioned me about how to speak about him in therapy. Like, I wasn't allowed to say his name, what school I went to, the fact that he was a professor. Like, he had told me, he got me into therapy in the first place. He's like, you should do this, because I was questioning my sexuality. And he's like, I think you should be in here. This, like, there's something wrong with you. And I was like, okay, there was kind of this religious abuse that went along with it. And I was like, all right. So he had explained how to talk about him in therapy. And then finally, the abuse had gotten so bad where I had this close relationship with my therapist. And I was like kind of dipping my toes in. And she kind of assumed and figured what was going on too before I had told her. But that was kind of like dipping my toes in the water, the first person I told. Then I ended up telling my high school violin teacher over the phone while the abuse was happening. But again, it's like that first step, you're kind of dipping your toes in. And all I had told him was, I have been assaulted at conservatory. I gave no further context. And it was his response that really mattered over the phone. And he was extremely kind. He'd had a similar story, and he made me feel safe by telling somebody. So then it trickled over into telling one of my friends from high school that wasn't tied to the music world. Then it was another friend, this was happening over the course of months. Then it was another friend that is in the music world, but did not go to the same conservatory. So she did not know these people. And then finally, I told my high school violin teacher in person. I gave him all the details. He'd used to have been a college professor. So I was like asking for advice. How do I get away from this person? And all those times that I was telling people and telling more details, I knew I was speaking out against what the professor had told me to do, and it was granting me more power. Like the abuse was not solely living in my head and his head anymore. Other people knew. So that made it a lot more easier for what came next. I basically spoke out anonymously first about my story. I posted it on a completely separate social media account under a fake name, and I changed a bunch of details about my identity and his identity, like made it completely so you could not figure it out. People figured it out and it got tied back to me, and people started like reporting for me to my school, which then led into going through reporting process. And as a result of me speaking out anonymously, my abuser, the professor, he called the police on me to kind of like, pin it on me that I was like losing my mind. But luckily, the lieutenant that came to my home was super kind, and he could see what was going on right away. So he was encouraging me to pursue things further. I was getting all these encouraging messages that day from other students and other people's like stories, just encouraging me to fight. So it's really, that was kind of the process of like dipping my toes in and then being like, well, okay, like I made the decision to tell certain people. And then I kind of just got like thrown out. Everybody knew once I'd spoken out anonymously. But I think the number one thing I'll end this question with is I realized every time that I spoke out, my abuser lost more and more power. And at first you're afraid of them when you think about speaking out. But once you actually do speak out, you realize it is very healing.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for sharing all of that information. There are a couple things that you said that really stood out to me. I mean, obviously, the courage that it took to speak out, because so much of this is very difficult to navigate when you're experiencing it, and it is scary to confront it often. And you had the courage to do that, which is amazing. What also struck me is that you had so much support and people believed you, which is incredible. And I'm so happy that you had that experience. Um, there is always safety in numbers. So as you said, as you were not alone in this, it took away power from the abuser, which is incredible, and that certainly is the goal. Sadly, there are so many people who don't have that kind of response or that kind of support that they receive when they do come out with the abuse. And so, when you were talking about the fact that you had all that support, and even when he turned it around and said you were going crazy and called the police, which is very, very common in these abusive dynamics, I'm so glad that you had enough support and a police officer that was kind and well versed in this, who knew not to be fooled by it. So anyway, thank you for sharing that.
I wasn't sure, Emily, did you want to push back at all on the support thing before I cut in?
Yeah, you know what? No, I think it is an important point is, yeah, at the beginning, I will say I did receive a lot of support. And when I hadn't really, all of the support I received has been overshadowed by the harassment that I had faced later on, unfortunately. So it's kind of nice to speak now about that first part where I was supported. I was so like, oh my God, when everything was happening, that I couldn't really process and appreciate what I had at the beginning. But later on, I still had 1 year left of school. So I had to go back to school, and the school was really awful with me. Some students were too, saying because I spoke out publicly, I ruined the reputation of the school. And like, I know now it wasn't me that did that. That was my abuser. That was the school itself and the way they responded. Um, but yeah, there was that. Some students, some professors, male professors there that also had history of alleged sexual abuse to other students. So it was tough. And then harassment online. I've gotten physical mail. Like it's just, it
So
comes with that as well. But, I got a good mix of both. I was very fortunate that I had enough evidence where nobody could really say this didn't happen because it was very obvious that it did. And on that anonymous account, I was able to share stuff that proved, oh, okay, there are messages from my abuser that I had not named. It's like, so here you go. You could see, yeah, something happened. So I think that's where the believing came from. It's like, you can't say
yeah,
it happened.
wasn't a he said, she said type of situation. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, well, thank you for clarifying that and telling us more about what you experienced because it is so important. It is so important for people to know that when they speak up, it is not, I mean, it's not an easy path either. So,
Mhm.
Emily, I'm sorry, Claire, I want to give you plenty of time to respond as well.
Yeah, sure. So the sexual abuse that I am talking about happened much longer ago, about 12 years. And I am somebody who saw Emily's account when she was first sharing it and it was first coming out who this was. Our time at conservatory did not overlap, but I was so drawn to her story. And I'll actually say the reason that I'm sharing it is largely her and the work that I've done with her. We have shared a lot of her story on our podcast because our podcast pertains to the classical music world and the abuses of power that are sort of baked into that system, which didn't really offer the proper platform for me to share anything publicly. I will say my own story happened much longer ago. It's never really been something I haven't talked about. As a matter of fact, I think I had to speak out before I was even ready because he was telling his version of the story. And the person who abused me, and I say groomed, even though he was a peer, because of the behavioral pattern. So while there may not be a legal recourse for that in terms of the psychological definition, in terms of what I have to work through in therapy, that is the absolutely clear pattern of behavior. And also the fact that it was allowed to happen, that this grooming happened over about a 2-year period. It's funny, that seems to be the timeline, and culminated in extorting photos of me. And so while there wasn't physical contact from this person, largely, I think, because we were minors, so how much opportunity do you get? I'm barely like about to be adults. It did a lot of psychological damage. And I had to deal with his version of the story in our very, very insular homeschool fundamentalist evangelical church community that I had been a part of since I was 8 years old, and watch how it protected the men, the boys in these situations, and how quickly I lost friends, lost community, my family lost friends, lost community. And I had to tell my story in order to sort of save face before I was necessarily ready to speak on these things. I had to learn how to tell people that this wasn't my fault before I really believed that internally. And I had the help of a therapist at the time. One of my sisters and my best friend were the first people I told. And when I told them, I laughed and I called myself a slut. And it was only through them and the look in their eyes and the fact that they were like, you need to talk to your mom, you need to talk to your therapist, that I was able to get the help I needed. But it came at the cost of an entire community. And so while I've been practiced in telling my story for a very long time, I have never had a platform really until Emily came along and I started telling my story to her, and the two of us started bonding over, oddly, how a 17-year-old's grooming tactics and a 50-something-year-old's grooming tactics have so much similarity down to verbatim quotes, and how these tactics seem to almost be instinctual for these kinds of predators. And Emily suggesting that we start a podcast, that has really been the first time that I've ever, I'm just a private little person, had any sort of experience even getting people reaching out to us to share the story. So largely the reason I'm able to talk about it on a more public platform is seeing the work that she's done. getting to see the way she's gone about her story, which has helped me to think about how would I like to tell mine, and just sort of the admiration I've had in her bravery in speaking out.
That's amazing, and I'm so glad you've had the courage to speak out. I mean, you're hitting on some really important things that I think most people experience who've gone through something like this, and that's the isolation and the sense of shame that comes with being discredited. It's a horrendous feeling, and I mean, my heart broke when you were describing how you felt about yourself. And thank you for sharing that, because I think that that's incredibly common, feeling crazy, feeling like it's my fault, or I asked for it, or I did this to create that, or maybe that's not really what happened, or that's not what the person meant, or it's just in my head, or I'm exaggerating. All of these things, right, that we say to ourselves in order to try to justify what's happened to us. So
Right.
thank you for being willing to talk about that and speak to that.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and the one thing I'll add to that is that purity culture, it teaches women how to avoid attraction, and it sells you on the lie that once you've attracted attention, you've already sinned. And you're never taught how to say no or enforce a boundary. You're taught how to avoid attention. And I think most of us know that when it comes to teenagers, it really doesn't matter and predators, it doesn't matter what you're wearing, it doesn't matter what you look like. And I really think that that is by design in order to keep women powerless, because you don't know how to say no, you blame yourself, and you think you're already in the wrong, you think you're not deserving. And I thought I was not deserving of putting up boundaries.
yeah, thank you for bringing that up as well. It is incredibly important, and the boundaries are not taught. I strongly believe that's something that should be taught from an early age in school as part of curriculum, self-defense, all of that. But sadly, this is not something that is taught, how to set healthy boundaries, how to say no, how to know our worth, all of those things. And so, yes, you add to it religious culture that enforces that as well, and it's a really difficult road to walk. Um, all right. And so you both had mentioned something that I think is really important to speak to, and that is these patterns of grooming. And so, my area of expertise is psychological abuse and the subtle aspects of psychological abuse that leave victims of any type of abuse questioning and second guessing themselves. And grooming is a big part of that. I mean, that's what lays the foundation, right? And so most abusers don't start with something that's completely overt and out there, because they know that they would not be successful, right? And so it's the process of sort of boiling the frog slowly, so to speak, and testing the waters. And when the abuser knows that they can get away with that, then they push it a little bit more, and then a little bit more, and then a little bit more. So if you would each kind of talk about your experiences with the patterns of grooming now that you're looking back and can see it all more clearly.
Yeah, so during the abuse, my therapist actually sent me an article and she was like, I just want you to read it. Let me know if you can see yourself in it. Maybe not, maybe I'm wrong. And it was an article talking about the 7 stages of grooming. And I remember reading it and I broke down sobbing. Like that was a cry I had probably never had before, because every single stage my abuser had done. And so it was black and white. And then I had really started to overcome the brainwashing that was done to me through the grooming. Um, so the first stage is that the abuser identifies a victim. That person is usually young, naive, and vulnerable. I, of course, was all three of those things. I had never had any sex education, not any sex ed talk. Like I said, in high school and everything, I was just so focused on the music world, everything. That was all I lived. That was all I had. I had previous abuse that I had endured. I was questioning my sexuality. My mom was just diagnosed with cancer at the time that that abuser had chosen me. It was my first time living alone on a college campus in a really big city. I just had a surgery on my arm that could have affected my career and I could have been done. So there was all of this going on. And I just lost a friend who, ironically, I guess, had sexually assaulted somebody. And so that was an immediate cutoff. And all of this was going on and had happened right when he met me when I was 17. So, and he knew about all of these things. And the second stage is gaining trust. So he was a professor, automatically a professor I'm going to trust. Well, my previous version of myself, I would trust, and I looked up to that person. I naively was thinking, okay, married men with children, those are the safest men that there are, right? But the scary part is no, those are kind of the most dangerous men, which I can get into later. But I trusted him. He offered me extra like graduate level classes. There were many personal conversations in his office that made him seem like a safe person. The third stage is becoming important to the victim. He basically became a father figure to me. He referred to me as his daughter several times and said that he was like a father to me, and I kind of believed that. He was my professor, which is an important figure in general. He was my only sex educator then at that point. He was a Catholic guidance figure to me for all sort of religious things. I had grown up Catholic and he was Catholic as well. Um, he kind of labeled himself as my therapist. This was before he had encouraged me to go into therapy. And he's like, we can talk every morning in my office when he knew I was dealing with the stuff with my mom and her cancer diagnosis. And then the fourth stage is isolation. So lots of things were done. Holidays were spent together, me with his family. I was going to church with his family. I was babysitting. He would refuse to let me take public transportation to get to these places several times. He had gone as far as to tell me, if you take the train and I told you not to, it's going to be your fault if you get raped on the train. And just totally bizarre. And then he would drive me many times from his place to church and then like back to where I was living. He would close and lock the door in his office during homework help, and he'd always change the topic from my homework to more personal stuff, talking bad about friends I had made. He was pushing me to like not be friends with certain people, and then he'd push me and say, well, it looks bad if I'm not friends with other people because then it looks like something is wrong that I'm spending time with him. So all of this brainwashing and contradicting himself, guilt tripping me. He got my personal phone number to call and text me. He wanted to help me with my homework, either super early in the morning when nobody was there or online, like on a Zoom call around 9 p.m. That was really early on in the abuse. I didn't think it was weird because I was like, this is just college, I guess. Like the pandemic made me assume, yeah, everybody kind of works all hours. So I was like, okay, you can only meet at this time to give me this extra help. That makes sense. And the next is creating secrecy. He had told me, you can't tell anybody that I'm helping you with this stuff. I'm telling you about sex education. You know, I'm giving you this talk. This is going to ruin both of our reputations, not just mine, but both. And then he would give like hypothetical scenarios. Imagine if this professor knew that you were talking to me about this stuff. Imagine what your best friend would think of you if she knew about these conversations that were happening in here. So that had gotten into my head. He'd take my phone by force many times in his office and would delete our messages, and he'd go through my pictures to make sure there were no screenshots of anything. And then sexualizing the relationship, that's where, you know, it starts to get to that point. And again, starting very small, just making sexual jokes during his sex education. He'd asked me about my experience with alcohol and with boys and previous relationships. And under this idea of, oh, I'm just like mentoring you, I'm just protecting you. Um, giving me the talk for the first time and claiming, well, I can give you the male perspective, which my wife can't give you. I'd gotten close with his wife, and his wife had talked to me about some things, and I felt obviously much more comfortable with her than talking about the stuff with him. And as soon as he noticed that, he was like, no, talk to me about this. You're going to get the male perspective. That's good. He was sending pornographic material. He wanted me to do certain things. To basically reach what he would call climax, which he had made a really horrific comment saying, this is so normal. I hope that all of my students are doing this, what I'm trying to get you to do. So he had completely normalized it and made me think that something's wrong with me if I don't do this, if I can't do this. And I had already been questioning my sexuality, and he had kind of been operating under the thing that, well, your sexuality is wrong. I want you to be able to think this way and think this way with me. I'm good to practice with. There's the progression of hugs too. So he would give me hugs under just like, oh, like my family just hugs a lot. That's just kind of how we are. So it'd be a normal hug. And then hugs on his own, like in his office, would be putting my hand like, or putting his hand over my bra strap. And then he would move his hand below, and then he would be touching me inappropriately. And eventually he'd put his hand up my shirt, and things had slowly, and that hug progression was over the course of like a year, would just start to slowly desensitize myself from certain things. And yeah, things had progressed from there. Then he wanted to send certain videos. He wanted to do FaceTime calls, making sure I could do it right for a future guy. Um, and then had claimed he needed to show me certain things, which eventually did lead into sexual assault in his office many times from there. And then lastly is controlling the relationship. So that was done through threats. I was threatened to be kicked out of school by him. There's a student of concern form that my school had had where he's like, I could fill this out and I could label you as crazy one because you're self-harming. And I was self-harming because of his abuse. But he's like, I could fill this out and you would be out of school because they'd say you're not ready to be here yet. Which Claire and I had talked about is it's kind of a legit threat, but also kind of a false threat. Um, he'd been there for years and I was new. So I figured, yeah, I'm probably going to be seen as the crazy one. He has a reputation he's built for himself. Um, there was manipulation. I was super malnourished. Um, I was having so many different like tests done for my stomach because I was so sick then. There was gift giving to guilt trip me. Um, as awful as it sounds now that I'm saying it, after many times that he'd sexually assaulted me, coming back to school the next day, he would have a donut sitting in his office in the side for me. And he's like, I got you this. Or at the very beginning of grooming, he had this huge bag of candy that his kids had gotten from Halloween. And he was like, here, I brought some for you. He would also give, in his words, loving stories. So loving pornographic material that wasn't as aggressive because he thought it would make me feel better to read that instead of thinking about what happened. And then, of course, spending time in church, which was important to me with him. Holidays, he would share his lunch with me many times. He had come to the school once because he knew I was low on groceries and he had given me melatonin to help me sleep and like apples and peanut butter jelly and all of that stuff. And so those are kind of all the stages that he followed. And from what I hear, most abusers do follow.
Absolutely. So thank you for sharing that. I mean, you spoke to it so articulately, and I think it's really clear from everything that you explained, what happens when you're being abused and the extent of the manipulation, because when the person is doing these kind, quote unquote, things on one side and then doing these other things that don't feel quite right, it's confusing. And so little by little, that progression gets worse and worse and worse. And you spoke to some of the physiological and psychological issues that you were experiencing as a result of this, which is often the case in any type of abusive relationship, the mental health suffering as well as the physical health suffering. So this is really I mean, what you experienced is just such a classic case. And again, I just appreciate that you're willing to speak up and out about it, and in such clear and certain terms, because I think it's just so important that young girls and women are educated on these patterns of behavior so that if they are noticing that this is happening to them in their lives, they can spot it, they can identify it, and even before it happens, that's even better. So anyway, thank you for sharing that. Claire, I'm going to let you kind of take it away from.
Sure. So yeah, I had a very similar pattern of behavior that this person followed with me, despite the massive contextual difference. And I didn't have that word. I didn't have the word grooming really until several years into college when I noticed not only this individual's attempts at the 7 stages, but the way in which the community really allowed that, the purity culture really allowed that to be fostered. And the fact that my story was so not unique in the context of this church community and in the context of evangelical Christianity as a whole, that he did identify me as vulnerable. I was a bit of a late bloomer. I was just starting to be more interested in boys. I had had a lot of health issues the year before. We were in the same homeschool co-op community, which kind of operated as a private school. We attended lectures every other day, and then we had homework on the days alone. So I had exposure to him. I didn't like him. I found him very annoying, and he had a reputation for being perverted and problematic. But because the duty in this kind of church community falls on women to be these peacemakers and these, arbiters of relationships, I would feel senses of guilt for disliking him. And I would think that that was the Holy Spirit convicting me. And I think he very much took advantage of that. I was just barely starting to develop an interest in other boys, including one of his friends who later on became like my childhood boyfriend. And I was not subtle, so he knew. And he would say the very same things that Emily's abuser would say, which is, I'm offering you the male perspective, when he would make me uncomfortable. Our communication started under the guise of secrecy because he was not supposed to text girls. I didn't want to get him in trouble. He would tell me, oh, I'm allowed to now, or I'm allowed to at these hours or with these questions. And it wasn't inappropriate first. So I was like, okay, well, that's his business. And so operating under that, there was already a level of secrecy in just basic communications. He would use self-pity. He would say, oh, I'm short, I'm ugly. No girl is ever going to want me. He participated in negging. He would give me a compliment and follow it up with an insult in order to keep me off balance. I remember the very first time I was 14, and he texted me and said, you have nice legs. Do you ever get insecure because your boobs are small? And I remember this being a huge turning point for me because at the time, again, just started developing. My brain had not even thought to develop an insecurity around breast size, because in my brain, I was like, it's a work in progress here. Like, why I'm not thinking about it. I started wearing bras like a year ago. But it also made me very anxious because I realized that other people were looking at my body. And that was something that I was told that if I did the right things and I followed the right rules and I followed the modesty checklist, I wouldn't attract that kind of attention. So then I started wondering what's wrong with me, both from the compliment and the insult. And of course, he was telling me that he was giving me, he's like, you just have sisters. You don't know what the male perspective is like. All guys are like this. If you ever want a relationship, you need to listen to me. If you're uncomfortable with this, how are you ever going to be in a relationship? But that let me know that boys were paying attention to me in a way that I was deeply uncomfortable with, which furthered this insecurity and the toxicity of that relationship. And his mentality, for all I knew, was totally normal. And it got to the point where, again, slow, over a year later, I would get resized for bras. And if my cup size went up, I would text him and he would say, I'm so proud of you. Looking back now, that's absurd. Why would I do that? He didn't ask me for that, but it got to the point where I was contributing willingly. I was compliant. And then, he would sort of tease me. I don't believe you. I don't believe you. I don't believe you look that way, to sort of lay the groundwork. And again, it was probably a year from this point before he ever got photos of me in a swimsuit. But in that meantime, his parents would turn off his internet at night. So he would ask me for pornographic images of other people, not myself. I had never looked up anything like that, and I didn't know what to even search. So I wasn't really able to comply, but he would get angry at me and he would say, this isn't natural. I need the release. So he would get me comfortable with that. He would send me soft pornographic content and be like, this looks like you. What if I told your boyfriend that this was you? And so, like, vaguely starting with threats, but they were set up as jokes. I had started antidepressants at 15. He was one of the first people I told, and he told me he would keep my secret when I wasn't intending it to be a secret. So contributing to the stigma of mental health. He also found out that I was self-harming just by guessing before I had ever told anyone. So then he was this keeper of secrets. And I would get angry. I'd cut him off for days, and then I would feel guilty. And then I would apologize to him, which would allow him to make progress, guilt tripping me because I needed to make it up to him. And so, eventually when this culminated in asking for photos, it started off with him comparing me to other women. Oh, you could never look like this girl. And I would get angry, and I would be like, I know the photo that he sent me specifically was of a girl hanging upside down. And I was like, well, she looks like that because she's upside down. And he was like, yeah, but you could never do that. So then I took a picture in a similar shirt, not an innately inappropriate picture. And I was like, look, and then he was like, I don't know how you could look like that. Oh my God, you have to show me what you're working with. I don't understand. and it ramped up and ramped up and ramped up. And of course I was shocked at first, but he wore me down. And it escalated from, wouldn't it be funny if I threatened you, to real threats. I had gotten into a very prestigious conservatory summer camp that could shape my trajectory. I'd only ever wanted to be an opera singer. And he told me, well, if I tell your parents you're self-harming, they'll keep you home from this camp. That was really what did it. And I negotiated down from topless to a swimsuit, but it was a bikini top that I was not allowed to wear in public. So, but I wanted that plausible deniability. I figured if this got out, lots of girls take pictures of themselves in bikinis, and that might look better for my family. But realistically, it showed just as much, and it was deeply uncomfortable. And, you know, I won't get into it, but I was physically assaulted by somebody else my senior year of high school. And I oftentimes say that the grooming that broke me down to the point of not knowing how to say no was more traumatic than any physical assault. In a way, I blame this first guy for anything else that ever happened to me, because I know how broken I was. And I may have hid some of it well. I may have been able to articulate a sense of confidence and sort of blamelessness, but I wasn't there. And I really wanted to protect my parents' reputation as well, particularly for my mom, whose entire world had been this church community. So, you know, to this day, I have nightmares about this person. He has online stalked me as recently as 2022. His wife was on my social media. I have no idea to what degree, if any, he's still looking at things. I try not to take it super seriously because I don't think it will escalate, but you know, that's, I've not been able to forget about that. I remain very guarded, and I do think it's interesting that the psychological component of this was more powerful to me than just straight up physical abuse.
Absolutely. And, you know, thank you for sharing all of this again so articulately. And absolutely, victims of abuse all say that. It's the psychological aspect of the abuse that is the most damaging, the hardest to recover from. You know, it stays with us and it affects so many things, including our self-esteem, self-worth, confidence in others, lack of trust in others, learning how to trust ourselves again. It's, you know, the ramifications are far-reaching, and you hit on some really important common patterns, like, you know, um, how he was good at evoking sympathy and making you feel sorry for him, and you know, the threats starting out as jokes and then escalating, and all of these different types of patterns that can be seen across the board in all abusive types of relationships. So, I want to thank you both so much for talking with me and sharing your stories and outlining so clearly the patterns that you all have experienced and can now see so well, and having the courage and confidence to speak up. I have no doubt it's going to help so many people and young girls and women to hear, to accomplished women like you speaking out and talking about what you've experienced. And I know we didn't get to all of our questions today, but I'm excited that that just opens the door to continue the conversation down the line. So anyway, thank you both for your time, and I look forward to connecting soon.
Thank you so much.